So, Amy, I've been reading in the news lately that Canada is looking to sign a free trade agreement with our second largest trading partner, China.
Yeah, I heard that too. The aim of this presentation is to debate the future involvement of Canada in this free trade agreement. Team 2A will argue against such involvement as it will be detrimental to the welfare of Canada.
Okay, well, obviously it sounds like you're opposed to a free trade agreement with China, so it led me to believe what makes a great trading partner anyways.
Well, James, to start, trade is about a positive sum activities which allow countries to consume beyond their own ability to produce. Countries are also able to produce products and services at less cost and more efficiently. Trade is best achieved through balance, aligned values, transparency, and trust to create a win-win situation that allows countries to reach higher economic well-being.
Okay, well, that makes total sense. So, where do we currently stand with China? I think we all know that Canada's trade with China is lopsided, both quantitatively and qualitatively.
Our trading with China made up a total of 70% of our overall trade deficit with all nations.
Sorry, say that again. 70%? That doesn't sound like a balanced trading partner.
Nope. Canada imports about $3 from China for every dollar worth of exports we sell them.
Well, what do we sell them anyways? Certainly not manufactured goods. Now that I think about it, there are very few things that China can't produce more cheaply than us.
The crux of the Canada-China trade relationship has always been that we send them raw materials and they ship consumer goods back to us. Since natural resources are globally traded commodities that already move tariff-free, free trade would probably absolutely have no benefit to resource exporters.
So, even if we don't have an FTA with China, that most of our natural resource products would already be tariff-free? Isn't our number one export to China oil? And that is already tariff-free? So basically, we would be removing tariffs on manufactured goods, which would place our manufacturers at an even greater disadvantage. Well, that just sounds dumb.
Yes, it does, James, and you should also know China has built a surplus of industrial facilities for every kind of consumer good manufacturing.
Wouldn't this massive surplus of capacity destroy the little manufacturing that Canada has left?
Yeah, their surplus of manufacturing plants are just the tip of the iceberg. China operates over 2,300 coal-fired power plants with almost 1,400 more planned or under construction. This, for them, means cheap power, and along with their government subsidies and all this extra capacity, you can't stop them.
Yeah, I mean, really, who can compete with that?
Not many countries can, especially not Canada. Canada has 1.7 million Canadian workers within the manufacturing sector that could potentially lose their jobs. And this isn't just the only thing that China's been doing to control global trade. After decades of buying Canadian canola, China's government has suddenly determined that our canola contains unacceptable impurities. This is a $2 billion market, which is very important to Canadian farmers.
Our canola is perfectly fine in other countries, so how could it be unacceptable in China?
I have a sneaking suspicion that it's because there's an enormous stockpile of Chinese canola, and that has something to do with it.
Ah, yes. You know what? They did this to the New Zealand dairy industry, and it pretty much crippled their economy. Seems like with one quick action, they can decimate most economies. I know in New Zealand, they built tons of dairy farms to supply the billion people in China. As soon as the Chinese government is not happy with another nation's decision, they stop buying their products as a punishment for not doing what they say. Canola, dairy, what other industries will China bully and create an imbalance in?
Well, I'm just getting started on our imbalanced relationship with China.
Tell me more.
Foreign direct investment by China into Canada accounted for $20.5 billion in 2015, which is a 101% increase from 2002. You can see in the graph that the gap is widening.
Well, why?
To answer this, we can look at each other's countries' foreign investment policies and see what's up.
I heard China's a tough country to do business with.
Yeah, they're the fourth most restricted market to foreign investment in the world. This is because China's foreign investment policies allow up to 25% of foreign ownership of investment firms and 49% into individual companies, which isn't very much. Canada, on the other hand, are largely open to FDIs from approved types of institutional investors in China, including banks. However, this approval process is still not fully defined and is shrouded in government secrecy.
So basically you're telling me we can only buy 49% of a Chinese company, but they can buy 100% of a Canadian company? That doesn't sound balanced.
No, it's not. And they have over $3 trillion to spend. And further the issue, the majority of the FDI is coming from state-owned enterprises.
I heard that 84% of Chinese firms are state-owned enterprises, which receive government loans and subsidies facilitated by corrupt officials. So how can Canadian companies compete with SOEs?
They can't financially, and China has made it clear they want all SOEs to be guaranteed full rights and possess any and all Canadian resources and corporate entities as China may choose, and that any interference will be considered impermissible restraint of trade.
That's extremely concerning because you just mentioned they have over $3 trillion. They could pretty much buy up all of Canada's industry and we would have no say.
Yeah, and they can gain significant control over the energy sector, which is something that China desperately needs.
Basically, a free trade agreement would allow a communist government to buy up Canada. Should we be aware of losing any other types of Canadian ownership?
Yeah, Canada could be flooded with Chinese capital, forcing many Canadians out of their own markets. Canada would lose ownership over its natural resources, real estate, and technology.
So Amy, how are we giving away our technology?
We're offshoring our Canadian technologies to factories in China, and we've provided them with these advantages they didn't have to develop nor spend their R&D dollars on.
So what you're saying is when a Canadian company turns over technology in exchange for access to today's Chinese market, it creates a Chinese competitor in tomorrow's global markets?
It certainly does, and it creates negative effects for our economic growth. It costs Canadians jobs, and it undercuts our innovation.
How would a free trade agreement with China cut jobs?
Well, as per the factor price equalization theorem, China is the net benefactor of the FTA between the countries. Once Canada and China become a single market under an FTA, China's less well-paid low-skilled worker wages will increase, whereas to stay competitive, Canada's low-skilled worker wages will either stay the same level or go down until an equilibrium is reached. Prices for housing and goods and services are not going to go down in Canada, and thus the Canadian low-skilled workers will be worse off compared to the pre-trade agreement period.
I seem to always be reading articles about China's consistent human rights violations, which clearly do not align to Canadian laws and values.
Oh yeah, they're perpetual human rights violators of global trade rules and norms. China is a military state which closely controls social media, does not allow for freedoms of expression or respect cultural diversity. The authoritative state spies and tortures its own citizens and does not protect the rights of the disabled or respect gender equality and sexual preferences.
Well, I can't imagine how they treat their labor force.
It's tragic how few of us realize how much stuff we buy is made by children and people working in horrific, unsafe conditions with long hours for a low wage.
But I heard in China they created a law that does not allow children under the age of 16 to work.
Yeah, but the government says under special circumstances they can. They call it educational labor. Basically, schools would have their students do something like growing or harvesting crops. But the problem is most schools abuse this law and they end up forcing their children to the factories.
Well, that just sounds like a loophole to skirt the labor laws.
It certainly is. China's also known for taking shortcuts in manufacturing and producing poor quality products. Did you know almost 1 in every 3 toys in China contains heavy metals?
Well, if we sign a free trade agreement with China, this would promote unethical and low-quality manufactured goods into Canada, as we would be removing tariffs on them.
Another important point is China's lack of financial transparency and trust. Their GDP calculations are just one number based on a total, as opposed to Western capitalist countries that are public, verifiable, and transparent. This makes it difficult for investors to sift through attempting to collaborate government statistics. China has also been involved in devaluing its currency against the dollar in a way to offset weakening domestic demand with increased exports.
Amy, this has been a very informative conversation. It's apparent that Canada should not enter into a free trade agreement with China as it would be detrimental to Canada's welfare. There is already a reoccurring imbalance in trade and FDI. China has not been transparent or forthcoming with information or what they would do with this information, thus leading to a lack of trust. How can we as a nation that's built on fundamental values like freedom of expression and religion partner with a country like China that does not align to our core values? I say no to free trade with China and yes to free trade with other nations where it will be a win-win and not a win-lose outcome.